My name is Alan Davis, and I had just started my dream job as a fire watchman at Pine Ridge National Forest. Pine Ridge was one of those places that felt untouched by time. The trees were ancient and the forest stretched for miles, a sea of green punctuated by the occasional clearing or stream. It was the perfect escape from the bustling city life I'd grown tired of. My post was a lone watchtower, perched on the highest peak in the forest. From there, I could see for miles in every direction. The view was breathtaking, especially at sunset when the sky turned into a canvas of fiery reds and oranges. My duties were simple: keep an eye out for fires and report any suspicious activity. It was a quiet, solitary job, which suited me just fine. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my days scanning the horizon, enjoying the tranquility and the fresh air. I'd brought plenty of books to read and often took long hikes through the forest during my off hours. Occasionally, I'd encounter hikers or campers, but for the most part, it was just me in the wilderness. One evening, as I was settling in for the night, I received a call on my radio. It was Hank, the senior fire watchman who was stationed at the next tower over, about 20 miles away. "Hey, Alan, you there?" "Yeah, Hank, what's up?" "Just checking in. Any signs of trouble?" "Nope. All quiet on my end. How about you?" "Same here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Some campers reported seeing strange lights in the forest last night. Probably nothing, but keep an eye out." "Will do. Thanks for the warning." "Take care, Alan. And remember, if you see anything unusual, don't hesitate to call it in." "Got it. Good night, Hank." I put the radio down and glanced out the window. The sun had set, and the forest was shrouded in darkness. I couldn't see any lights or signs of activity, but I decided to stay up a bit longer and keep watch, just in case. As the hours passed, I found myself dozing off in my chair. Just as I was about to head to bed, a faint glow caught my eye. I stood up and peered through the binoculars, scanning the tree line. There in the distance I saw them, small flickering lights moving through the forest. I grabbed my radio and called Hank. "Hank, you there? This is Alan." "Go ahead, Alan. What's up?" "I see the lights. They're moving through the forest, heading west." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm looking right at them. Should I investigate?" "Negative. Stay put and keep an eye on them. If they get too close to your position, call it in. I'll notify the rangers." "Understood. Thanks, Hank." I watched the lights for a while longer, but they eventually disappeared into the trees. Feeling uneasy, I locked the door to the watchtower and made sure my flashlight and radio were within reach before finally going to bed. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to hike down to the spot where I'd seen the lights. The forest was peaceful, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. As I approached the area, I noticed something strange. There were no animal tracks or signs of wildlife. It was as if the forest had gone silent overnight. I reached the spot and looked around. There was no sign of the lights or anything out of the ordinary. I was about to head back when I noticed something glinting in the underbrush. I bent down and picked it up. It was a small, metallic object, shaped like a disc with strange symbols etched into its surface. I turned it over in my hand, trying to make sense of the symbols. They didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. I decided to take it back to the watchtower and examine it later. That afternoon, as I was preparing my lunch, I heard a commotion on the radio. It was Hank, sounding more alarmed than I'd ever heard him. "Alan, come in. This is Hank." "I'm here, Hank. What's going on?" "We've got a situation. A group of campers went missing last night. Their campsite is abandoned, and there's no sign of them." My heart skipped a beat. "Where were they last seen?" "Near your sector. The rangers are organizing a search party, but they could use your help. Can you join them?" "Of course, I'll head out right away." I grabbed my gear and set out towards the last known location of the missing campers. As I trekked through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees seemed to close in around me, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. I reached the campsite just as the search party was arriving. The rangers greeted me and filled me in on the situation. The campers had been a group of college students on a weekend trip. They'd set up camp the previous evening, but by morning they were gone. Their tents and belongings were still there, undisturbed. We spread out and began searching the surrounding area. Hours passed with no sign of the campers. As dusk approached, the rangers decided to call off the search for the night and resume in the morning. I volunteered to stay behind and keep watch, hoping to find some clue in the darkness. The night was unnervingly quiet. I sat by the campfire, my flashlight and radio close at hand. As the hours passed, I found myself dozing off, despite my best efforts to stay awake. Suddenly, a strange noise jolted me awake, a low humming sound, like distant machinery. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees. The humming grew louder, and then I saw them, the lights moving towards the campsite. This time, they were closer, and I could make out more details. They weren't just random flickers. They formed a pattern, almost like they were moving in a deliberate formation. I raised my radio to call for backup, but stopped when I heard a voice. It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but it was unmistakable. Someone was calling my name. "Alan, Alan." I spun around, shining my flashlight in all directions, but saw no one. The voice continued, growing louder and more insistent. "Alan, help us!" It was the voice of a young woman, filled with desperation. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The lights seemed to lead me deeper into the forest, their glow casting eerie shadows on the trees. Finally, I reached a clearing. The lights converged in the center, and there, standing in the glow, were the missing campers. They looked terrified, their eyes wide with fear. "Help us," the young woman said, reaching out to me. "Please help us." Before I could respond, the lights intensified, and a blinding flash filled the clearing. I shielded my eyes, and when I looked again, the campers were gone. The lights had vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. I stumbled back to the campsite, my mind racing. What had I just seen? Were the campers really there, or had it been some kind of hallucination? I grabbed my radio and called Hank. "Hank, this is Alan. Do you copy?" "Go ahead, Alan. What's wrong?" "I saw them, Hank, the campers. They were in the forest, surrounded by lights. But then they just disappeared." "Calm down, Alan. Tell me exactly what happened." I recounted the events as best as I could, but even as I spoke, it sounded unbelievable. Hank was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Alan, I believe you. There's something strange going on in that forest. We need to get to the bottom of this. I'm coming over to your sector first thing in the morning. Stay safe." "Thanks, Hank. I'll be here." The next morning, Hank arrived at the Watchtower, looking tired but determined. We sat down over coffee and discussed the situation. "Alan, I've been working here for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this," Hank said. "We need to figure out what's happening before more people go missing." "I agree, but where do we start?" Hank pulled out a map of the forest and spread it on the table. "Let's retrace our steps. You said you saw the lights near the campsite, and then they led you to the clearing. Show me where." I pointed out the locations on the map, and Hank marked them with a red pen. "We'll start there. We need to look for any clues or evidence that might explain what's going on." We spent the day combing the area, but found nothing out of the ordinary. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just an eerie silence that seemed to hang over the forest. As the sun began to set, we made our way back to the Watchtower. "We're missing something," Hank said, frustration evident in his voice. "There has to be a reason why this is happening." I remembered the metallic disc I had found the previous day and pulled it out of my pocket. "I found this near the clearing. Do you think it could be related?" Hank examined the disc, his brow furrowing. "I've never seen anything like this. These symbols, they look almost otherworldly." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. But I have a feeling this is connected to the lights and the disappearances. We need to figure out what these symbols mean." We spent the next few days researching the symbols, but came up empty-handed. They didn't match any known language or script. Frustrated, we decided to focus on the lights instead. One night, as we were going over our notes, Hank had an idea. What if the lights are some kind of signal? Maybe they're trying to communicate with us. Communicate? You mean like Morse code? Exactly. We need to observe the lights and see if there's a pattern. We took turns keeping watch over the next few nights, carefully recording the movements of the lights. It was a painstaking process, but eventually we began to notice a pattern. The lights seemed to follow a specific sequence, like a coded message. Hank worked tirelessly to decode the message, and after several sleepless nights, he finally cracked it. Alan, I think I've got it. The lights are spelling out a location. Coordinates, to be exact. Coordinates? Where do they lead? Hank pointed to the map. Right here, deep in the forest. We need to go there and see what we find. The next morning, we set out for the coordinates. The forest grew denser as we ventured deeper, and an uneasy feeling settled over us. After several hours of hiking, we reached the location. There, in the middle of the forest, we found an old, abandoned cabin. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung off its hinges. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. This is it, Hank said, his voice barely a whisper. Whatever's happening, it's connected to this place. We approached the cabin cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The interior was musty and filled with cobwebs. As we explored the rooms, we found strange artifacts, more discs like the one I had found, and old journals filled with cryptic notes. Hank picked up one of the journals and began to read. These notes, they talk about experiments, about trying to contact other dimensions. Whoever lived here was trying to open a gateway. A gateway? To where? To another world, another reality. These lights, they're not from our world. They're from somewhere else. As Hank spoke, a low humming sound filled the air. The lights appeared outside the cabin, their glow seeping through the cracks in the walls. They're here, I whispered. The lights grew brighter, and the humming intensified. We stepped outside, and the lights converged around us, forming a circle. The air crackled with energy, and I felt a strange sensation, like I was being pulled in different directions. Hank held up one of the discs, and the symbols began to glow. The discs, they're keys. They can open the gateway. I looked at the lights, then back at Hank. What do? We need to close the gateway. If we don't, more people will disappear. Hank placed the disc in the center of the circle, and the ground began to tremble. The lights pulsed, and a portal started to form. A swirling vortex of light and darkness. Quick, Alan! We need to destroy the disc, Hank shouted. I grabbed a rock and smashed it against the disc. The symbols flickered and the portal wavered. I hit it again, harder, and the disc shattered. The portal collapsed and the lights vanished. The forest fell silent and the humming ceased. We stood there, breathing heavily, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. We did it, Hank said, his voice filled with relief. We closed the gateway. The next few days were a blur. The rangers continued their search for the missing campers, but they were never found. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. Hank and I decided not to tell anyone about the gateway or the lights. No one would believe us, and there was no way to prove what we had seen. I continued my duties as a fire watchman, but the forest felt different now. The silence that had once been comforting now seemed ominous, and every rustle of leaves made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of the lights. Hank retired a few months later, leaving me to watch over Pine Ridge alone. I often found myself thinking about the campers and wondering what had happened to them. Were they trapped in another world, or had they simply ceased to exist? One night, as I was sitting in the Watchtower, I saw a faint glow in the distance. My heart raced, and I grabbed my binoculars. The lights were back, moving through the forest in their familiar pattern. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed my gear and set out into the night, determined to find the source of the lights and close the gateway for good. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the lights grew brighter, guiding me towards an unknown destination. The air crackled with energy, and I felt that strange sensation of being pulled in different directions. I reached the clearing where the portal had formed before. The ground trembled, and a new vortex began to take shape. I held up one of the discs, the symbols glowing with an otherworldly light. This time, I knew what to do. I placed the disc in the center of the circle and smashed it with all my strength. The symbols flickered and the portal wavered. I hit it again, harder, and the disc shattered. The portal collapsed and the lights vanished. The forest fell silent and the humming ceased. I stood there, breathing heavily, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. The next morning, I woke up in the Watchtower, my body aching. I couldn't remember how I had gotten back, but I knew one thing for certain: the lights were gone. The forest felt different now, almost peaceful. The silence that had once been ominous now seemed comforting, and I knew that the gateway was finally closed. I continued my duties as a fire watchman, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The trees seemed to whisper secrets, and every rustle of leaves made me uneasy. I knew that I had seen things that defied explanation, and I wondered if the forest held more mysteries than I could ever understand. Like and subscribe for more stories like this.